Press Herald, and I want to welcome you all today and thank you for coming. It's a beautiful day out. We're so happy to see you here. Sponsors of Like a Boss for a very long time. So a big thank you to Hub International, JP Morgan Chase, Vistage, Coffee by Design, and our presenting sponsor, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Here to say a few words from Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, I'd like to introduce Bill Whitmore.
Good morning, everybody. So Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, most of you I think probably know, we sell health insurance, but what's important to us is also supporting our communities in other ways, and we love sponsoring events like this. A few weeks ago, Lisa spoke with Andy Muller, CEO of the Maine Health. Today, Don Perkins, the president and CEO of Gulf of Maine Research Institute. It just shows you, the depth and the breadth of what we have here and the conversations that they have. The like a boss, how did they get to where they are? There's similarities that run through the conversations, but there's the unique aspects of them too that make them really, really interesting. I've never met Don until about 5 minutes ago, which is hard to believe since we've both been here since the 80s. But it's really interesting reading about him. He's been leading the Gulf of Maine Institute for over 25 years. Obviously, the marine environment industry is very important to all of Maine, our economy and everything that we do here. But it's not just the Gulf of Maine. He's been involved with projects in the Gulf of Mexico, working with Native American tribes. He's on the board of directors of MMG Insurance. He went to Stanford for an MBA. So there's a lot more to Don than just our oceans here. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Thank you to the Portland Press Herald for doing these events, bringing them back. They're tremendous. Thank you to Lisa DeSisto. These conversations are really fun to listen to. And thanks everybody for being here today.
And thank you, Bill. We're so appreciative of your partnership with us. And now, please enjoy a short video from the Maine Research Institute, Gulf of Maine Research Institute. Sorry, I really do have to read off of these things. And as we welcome to the stage, Lisa DeSisto and Don Perkins.
The room really filled up. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to talk to Don this morning. I'm going to stumble every time I say the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, so I'm just going to go slow. Also, we're live streaming this morning, so welcome to our live stream audience. If you want to share on social that you can follow along this morning's discussion, it's on pressherald.com. And just remind people at the live stream, they do not enjoy Coffee by Design or complimentary donuts. But we'll try to give them as much as possible. So thank you for being here and welcome, Don.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us.
So before we go into the Wayback Machine on Don Perkins, why don't you just kind of set up the nucleus of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and what you do?
So we're an independent 501c3 organization. We're nonpartisan. We're focused on the Gulf of Maine. How do we sustain its resilience and the communities that are around it? And our mission is to develop collaborative solutions to global ocean challenges. We're challenged here by the Gulf of Maine warming faster than most of the world's oceans. So we're really on the bleeding edge of climate change. And so currently we're focused on 4 challenges. The first is, how do we reckon with, adapt to mitigate climate change? And then there's 3 more specific things. One is how do we understand the ecosystem as it's changing? The second is how do we produce premium quality, responsibly harvested seafood as both sustenance and livelihood? And third, how do we support communities around the Gulf of Maine to reckon with climate change and develop as resilient communities, as opposed to being victims of what we're going to face over the next several decades?
And how many in the audience actually went to the Gulf of Maine Research Institute as a middle schooler on a field trip or chaperoned? Yeah. And I just say you do incredible work organizing those kids, because they were crazy that day. And they actually walked away with knowledge, information, curiosity, and developed their critical thinking skills. So yeah, it's such a fun program. Chaperone one if you have the opportunity. So let's talk about the Don Perkins early years. So you were born in Waterville, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you been back to Waterville lately?
I have.
Yeah, because it's on fire.
It's changed a lot.
It's great, right?
Yeah.
And multi-generations of your family grew up
in Waterville, up in the county. Yep.
And then went to high school locally?
Cape Elizabeth.
Okay, and you're still there?
I'm back there. We went to high school there, was gone for a long time, and after our family left and went on to other things, my wife and I moved out there, and it's a pleasure to live there.
Right by the ocean. It reminds you every day of all the work that you have to do, right?
Yeah. But it's interesting, we don't live on the water, but we can hear the water, and it's really subtle to experience the water just by listening to it.
So I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm excited for you to answer it. Did you deliver a newspaper as all the CEOs in Maine have? It's a thing.
Well, I'm going to break the mold here. Yeah. No, I can't remember whether my first paying job was shoveling dirt or shoveling snow.
Oh, okay. But it was shoveling something.
It was shoveling something.
Yeah. And so you talk about your education and what made you decide to study anthropology.
Yeah. So I went to high school here. I went to college at Dartmouth College. I frankly couldn't figure out what I wanted to study. I put together an anthropology degree, but after the fact, what I walked away with was just a kind of a systematic understanding that every group of people has a different culture, and you have to understand that in order to work with them. And then later I went to business school, and there I kind of learned the basic analytical tools and I think more importantly frameworks for managing complexity. And while those were that kind of education is important, the more valuable lessons I learned were really from I worked for 5 years for 2 different outward bound schools, and so the work there was, how do you take on 12 strangers every month and provide them with fundamental training to take on a lot of responsibility, and then just support them to perform. And the real lesson there was just the enormous potential we all have as individuals. And then I spent a lot of time out of the country, and I suspect many of you have traveled and lived around the world, and you can't go to another place without being humbled by the challenges that other people deal with, and appreciation of the responsibilities we have back here.
Yeah. So your resume shows that you lived in Brazil and Israel, if I'm recalling that correctly. So what were you doing in those countries, and what are some things that, or even any of your early experiences that you carry with you today?
So I was a bit of a social outcast as a kid, and then college, and I just wanted to get out of the country at that time. And so after my first year of college, I went and lived in Israel for 6 months and worked in a kibbutz up on the Golan Heights. It was 75, so right after the 73 war. And it was a militarized environment. It's a wildly participatory democracy, and the lesson there was we just can't take anything for granted, and obviously that lesson stands. And then in Brazil, I lived and worked for about almost a year. I was there in college, and then there several years later, running a foundation healthcare operation. But the lesson there was I lived in a favela and worked in favelas, mostly in Rio de Janeiro, and it's really about the challenges that people are living in really hard communities are. They're real, and people find joy and navigate those. And interestingly, it gave me both a lot of confidence in humanity's capability, and again, a lot of sense of responsibility for what do we do here that affects people in other parts of the world.
You also, I noticed in your bio, worked at Binex. Now,
Yes.
We've all taken their COVID tests many times.
Yeah, so I worked at Binex back in the early 90s. It was
Pre-COVID.
way pre-COVID.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, that paper, for all of you taking that test, so I was there when that technology was developed for strep throat. And the company was really rocky, on the verge of bankruptcy. It was a hard phase of a startup, and I left, and they went on to become wildly successful, acquired 3 or 4 times, now part of Abbott. And the twist on this is in the early days of COVID, we got a call from Abbott saying, "Do you have some lab space?" And the team that developed that test did it on the first floor of GMRI. And the woman who headed that team, I recognized her by her voice one day that she had been at Binex at the same time. So it was really, and that's an amazing story what they did. It's an amazing story.
Certainly. Wow, that's amazing that technology though for the test was invented back then. Yeah, we're all super familiar with it. So could you kind of break down the areas of focus at GMRI?
Yeah, so what we're focused on here is system change, and there's 2 long-term kind of perpetual aspects of that. The first is science, is understanding. You just constantly have to work at understanding a complex system like this. The second is education. If we don't nurture a scientifically literate, critical thinking community, body politic, then we're just not capable of dealing with the kind of ethical and human challenges in the century. And obviously we all live that. So there's those 2 long-term forever things. And you mentioned our education program. For those of you who haven't visited GMRI, pre-COVID, we were seeing about 70% of the state's 5th or 6th grade in our lab every year in a digital research environment where they come in and do research in the lab. And the concept there is provide opportunity from kids, doesn't matter their zip code, doesn't matter where they woke up. They come from Aroostook County, they come from Portland, they come from all over the state, to kind of excite them about science at a time when most of us bailed out of math and science, and equally important to support their teachers. So the long-term science and education, and then the shorter-term kind of problem-solving cycle on 2 fronts. The first is the ocean is complex. There's lots of stakeholders. The communities are very specific and unusual, and so there's a lot of community work and we take on kind of community challenges. It could be, how do you increase the price of responsibly caught seafood, or how do you provide training opportunities for fishermen to participate in the regulatory process. And those are 5 to 10 year kind of cycles of problem solving. And similarly on the market side, more recently, as many of you know, we started a for-profit side called Gulf of Maine Ventures. And the notion there is that if we can hook a market trend to solve a problem, we're going to have more impact probably than what we might do in the regulatory arena or whatnot. So we've spun off a couple of startup companies. We're supporting about 30 blue economy companies around the region. And so again, that kind of technology and business approach to solving problems is every bit as important.
Mm-hmm. How did you develop your leadership style? And how would you describe it?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I worked for the Outward Bound School, and there, I was young. I started there at the age of 21, and responsible for a group of 12 people. They could be teachers, they could be vets, they could be kids, they could be kids from the Bronx, and just the process of every month taking 12 strangers and figuring out how to support their safety in a challenging physical environment, how to support their their personal growth. How to get them functioning as a team. I mean, that stuff's all really basic, and to do so 24/7 and with a lot of pace. So that, for me, that was really that was more formative. And in terms of how does that translate today? It's about walking the walk. We hear a lot of platitudes, so it's about walking the walk. It's about supporting people in really hard places, giving them the authority and responsibility to deal with hard things, and it's about recognizing people, mostly individually, and no matter how big you get, recognizing people.
Someone on your staff described you as hands-on without micromanaging.
Some would describe me as hands-on with micromanaging too, probably. Part of this is the size of the organization. We're 80 staff, and so we're big enough that you can't micromanage, but we're small enough that you can kind of keep track of the whole organization. And I think you have to pay attention to the details. And so, being hands-on with people, particularly where there's risk or opportunity. And on the other hand, you really got to hire good people and turn them loose and stay out of their way.
So that's a great point about hiring good people. So are there certain characteristics, attributes that you look for when you're adding people to your staff? Because you also have a very varied staff as well, right? I mean, you've got scientists, you've got research folks, but you've got community connectors and educators. So
yeah, so kind of big picture, I think about it as it's kind of one part team, one part strategy, and one part culture. And from a team point of view, it's about hiring incredibly capable, oftentimes eclectic, but other times wildly specialized staff to deal with complicated problems. And we have a real mix of young people with enormous responsibility, older people with lots of responsibility. We take bets on people. It's really important to find somebody who's hungry and has a lot of potential and turn them loose. And we've been just blessed by really dedicated, high impact people.
You should go to their website if you haven't, because it is one of the best constructed sites that really talks about your mission, is well organized, and I was super impressed by it. And immediately it jumped out at me. You have a 5-year strategic planning process, and you can read their strategic plan, which is also a valuable tool when considering your own for your company. Your 5-year plan is 2017 to 2022. So I assume, are you working on a new plan, and talk about that process? Like, how do you evaluate, did we do well on the 5-year plan that's coming to a close? And what are the important things to include? What's the process look like?
Yeah, so we are about every 5 years we do a deep dive on strategy, but we work it month to month. I mean, we spend a day a month, 8 months of the year as a management team of 10 working hard on emerging strategy issues. So it just has to be a constantly rolling process. And for us, it starts with reaching out and listening. We will typically identify 50 to 100 external stakeholders, fishermen, fishery managers, scientists, educators, community leaders, politicians, and reach out to them and hear what they identify as problems, what they see us good at, what they see us not good at, where we're making mistakes. And that external perspective is really critical. And then it's about, supporting people to think big. And we've done a lot of that in the last few months, and we're now just starting. I'm seeing a few of our team out here laughing. We're just starting the hard part of how do you grind that down and
right
and focus. And in in the nonprofit, social, and environmental world, you can't have impact by, in a corporate entity, you have revenue and you can decide where to flow that revenue to have impact. In the nonprofit world, you got to go raise money in the midst of everybody else, all the funders' priorities. And it's much more of a weaving a tapestry to then solve problems. And the problems we're solving, we don't have that direct control over. We need a law passed in Congress, or we need a fishery management action, and that gets done by other people. So there's a lot of real nuance about how you move a system, and it's amazing. A small organization in a small state, we can move a market, we can move a regulatory decision, if you break it down.
So how does the strategic plan, the 5-year plan, guide your work? How often are you going back and checking in on it, making adjustments to it? Like, what if something urgent comes up that's not part of the plan? Does the plan drive the focus?
Yeah, so basically every year after the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30, we'll spend the summer just kind of reflecting on what worked and what didn't work last year. How do we measure that, and more importantly, what adjustments are we going to make going forward? It just has to be a living process. We've 2 Januaries ago, that process led the person who runs our community program to really look at community needs as they've been changing. And he identified the issue of access to fishing rights, access to working waterfront. Since it's 3 years into a strategic plan, we kind of worked that up, brought it to our board. There was a lot of enthusiasm for what he did. And 6 weeks later, a fisherman by the name of Willie Spears, who some of you know, showed up banging on our locked door, demanded that our receptionist, who was there to take people, this is middle of COVID, and demanded that she find me. I was working at home. I went in, and Willie said, "You realize that the Poole family is going to sell Union Wharf," and we didn't know that. So that that kind of real evolving strategy work, it set the context. If we hadn't done that, we would have said, "What a shame."
Yeah.
So I think if you keep your strategy evolving, it's likely to be there for you when the right problems come along that you have to solve. And also there are times when we say no.
Yeah. That's so interesting, though, that you found out because he came and pounded on the door, which really shows people need to get back to the office. So just throwing that out there, because you would have missed that opportunity if the receptionist was working from home. But let's talk about collaboration, because the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and your bio, in fact, you've been really successful by pulling together successful collaborations. And sometimes, I know in my experience, when we've tried to collaborate with others, we've failed. So what do you think the critical elements are for a collaboration to be successful? And what are some red flags where things haven't? And definitely use the Union Wharf example, which is so brilliant to talk about that. So, as a small organization working, in the middle of these, kind of a complex ecosystem, economy, regulatory system, et cetera, we can't do anything by ourselves. We can only have impact by partnering. And so we do it all the time. We partner with a couple hundred schools to bring their students. We partner with 7th and 8th grade teachers and a really interesting teacher mentorship effort in outlying counties. We partner, our scientists are partnering with people inside across disciplines. They're partnering with partners all over the world, and on it goes. So we really have hundreds of collaborations going all the time. And it's at one level, it's part of what we do. Sure.
At another level, it's about picking the right partners, and knowing to say no or to step away. And I think the most fundamental piece there is trust. And if you find a partner you can trust, or oftentimes if you work at it, because partnerships, like any relationship, have their ups and downs, you work at it. And, it's just about trust and commitment. And
Describe the Union Wharf initiative, though, and how that is a model for really preserving access to working waterfront, not just in Maine, but what I love about what you do is it's a model in Maine, but it has relevance worldwide.
Yeah, so, I mean, we all know this living here in Portland, but, we've got 3,000 miles of coastline, and around 20 miles of it is working waterfront. So and it's not getting bigger. The real estate market has soared, and it's dampened a bit here. Quality of life here is going to still drive the cost of waterfront property. So, that's the backdrop. Process-wise, number one, we have these really intimate relationships with fishermen, and this fisherman chose to come talk to us. And so that, having those relationships matters, and the trust matters. Our reaction wasn't, let's go buy that wharf. Our reaction was, gosh, there's got to be someone out there who wants to do this. So I called Peter Handy and said, Peter, how about it? Are you looking at this? And he said, no. And we called about 40 people around the state, just trying to find someone who was working on this to support them. And we couldn't find anybody who in the waterfront community who was going for it. And I honestly don't know when it was we made the decision that, geez, actually, one of the factors when we got the prospectus and we looked at it, there are 27 businesses on that wharf, 27 businesses, and they all pay rent. And so so back to the business side of these problems, you look at that and say, geez, we could take out a mortgage. In fact, we could take out 80% loan to value. So it's really kind of digging into the community, but then digging into the financial details, the business. That we've owned a wharf for 25 years. These wharfs are incredibly complicated infrastructure to maintain. We understand that, and we just kind of chewed at it. And we went to our donor community for the other 20%. This is a $12 million deal. We borrowed $3 million from a group of donors who lent us that money at extremely low interest rates. The premise, like any conservation deal, was we got to move fast to go acquire this property, and then we can lay in long-term capital to sustain it. And we did all that during a pandemic. We looked at the engineering, the structure. I mean, all the things you do, and the pools were honorable. They're really good people, and they wanted to see their legacy continued. And so it was quite a process. We were the second highest bidder. That was a hard negotiated real estate transaction with a shared vision that working waterfront is a really important part of who we are as a community.
Yes, if you go back and read the Press Herald archives, you can get all the details on this, including the fact that you weren't the highest bidder and that they chose to sell to you because of your stewardship and continuation of making it accessible to the people that need access to the working waterfront. So I think it's a really, really powerful story and a model for so many other things, which is great. All right, now, one of the things that you have to be a master at is breaking down complex problems into actionable initiatives, solutions, and there's nothing bigger and more overwhelming to think about than climate change. So how do you, as a leader, tackle that?
So first and foremost, you hire people that are smarter than you are, and we have an incredibly talented. We've got a chief scientist who just joined us, and she spent 20 years on the forefront of dealing with climate change and fisheries in Alaska. And arguably, they're one of the leaders out there in the world on this issue. So, we've got someone who really understands the science, the ecosystem, and brings, really profound insight into what are the drivers and what's going to happen over the next 50 years. Ditto on the education side. How do people learn? A big part of the climate thing is, well, how do we learn about something that's profoundly challenging, that's angst inducing? How do people learn about that stuff, and how do we open up beyond the politics? And then there's the community side. How are people in Portland, versus people in friendship. For how are real families, real communities going to deal with this? How does Congress work?
Great question.
Yeah, and the interesting thing there is that we have two senators, just like every other state, and so we can have as much impact on a problem there as anywhere. So it's about putting the town together to break it down, because I'm just a generalist. I can't break down the climate problem. Back to shoveling dirt or shoveling snow, I think it does boil down to really thinking through how a system works on a given problem, figuring out where the points of leverage are, and then just doing the work. You move a pile of dirt one shovel at a time. And I think ultimately we need a tax on carbon to change the way we behave. Until that happens, it's about all the things that people take initiative of. So, a seafood company taking plastic out of its packaging, us figuring out how to operate a carbon neutral facility, the governor's climate initiative, all that seemingly insufficient activity, it adds up. And something like this, you just have to have the faith that we move these pieces along, and an institution that's just grossly ineffective at a lot of things, Congress. I think we will see comprehensive carbon legislation sometime in the next decade, and I think it's 20 and 30-year-olds that are going to demand it, and they will be our salvation on this one.
That's great.
Yeah.
You say that you're not that you don't have the solution to the problem, but you're leading the Institute's efforts toward it and putting the right team together. So I think that's really critical from a leadership, from the CEO's perspective, right? You've got to put the team together to tackle it and deliver it to the public in a way they can take action on it and understand it.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that I mean it when I say it's all about the rest of the team, because it is. That said, I think the single thing that, other than just caring for people, which I think is fundamental, is willing to take huge risks as an organization and manage them. The kind of problems that we've taken on, there's a higher probability of failure than there is success, and so it's being willing to take big risks. It's being willing to back up other people taking big risks, and when someone makes a mistake or fails, it's just you learn from it. As long as I like to say you got 10 fingers, 10 toes. After a mess, then you just learn from the mess.
And the board has to be supportive of the risk taking.
Yes, the board. So I'm glad you raised that, because I worked in a nonprofit that had CEO, founder, board struggles. I worked in a couple nonprofits early on where the CEOs were jettisoned by boards, and so I operate with a paranoia about how boards can move really fast and CEOs can be gone. As a result of that, I probably spend a third of my time on board development and board governance, because that group of people they're every bit as important as staff. Good governance makes for a healthy organization, and the essence of that is good people, and there's plenty of good people around. We've got Lisa Hook in the audience, who's a board member, is a great example. Do we have any other board members here? No. But the other thing from a management point of view is transparency. A surprise board is an unhappy board. A board that's helping a team wrestle with really hard problems, with figuring out how to resolve a failure. That's a board that's excited because they're doing their job.
Well, I will say that paranoia has been effective for you because you've been CEO for more than 25 years. So I feel like you got that board relationship thing down. I'm sure that you work at it every day. And I noticed in your bio too, a lot that governance is a passion of yours. And that's fascinating, because a lot of people, I don't think, have an appreciation for how it really fuels the company. Yeah,
well, it's kind of the essence of hands-on and hands-off. You have to whether it's supporting a board and developing a board or serving on a board, you have to do the work of understanding the details, but then you have to really support, management or expect and earn the support as a manager to do the work and again, keep a board engaged for their advice. And it's so fundamentally important. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about workplace and culture, because I think all of us are wrestling with this right now, which is how do we get people back to the office? And so how has that worked for you and your staff? What's the status? How are people? I mean, I can imagine scientists have to be in a lab, research scientists have to be in a lab.
Well, so it's been brutal. I suspect, we're all just, it's been a wearing 2 or 3 years. First. Second is we shut down on Friday the 20th? No, Friday the 13th.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And Friday the 13th, and because, good staff, we had an IT guy who saw it coming 2 months earlier. Monday morning, we had 80 staff come up on Zoom, like probably a lot of you did. Contrary to your comment, a lot of science, because it's modeling and computational, can be done virtually. And so our science side was probably the side of the organization that made the move virtual easiest. Mm-hmm. Because we're dealing with seafood, we're an essential industry. And so the scientists that, out of 35 scientists, 5 of our scientists needed to be in the lab, and they did. We, our thing was bringing, 10,000 school kids a year to GMRI to have this extraordinary research experience. How do you do that virtually? And we had a week of existential challenge about that. And what our team did is they reached out to the teachers and said, what do you need? And the teachers said, don't send us curriculum, don't send us digital stuff. We just need time. They were traumatized. What our team decided is, okay, we'll take your kids for an hour a day, 5 for a week, and do science with them online. And you can do whatever you need to do. You can work with a kid who's struggling. You can listen, you can do planning. And our team, in the course of 2 weeks, flipped a profoundly in-person experience into a digital experience. And I could tell you that story on and on. In some ways, that was the easy part. Was, we had a seafood business that was selling fish to white table restaurants. Not only the restaurants closed down, but fishermen stopped fishing. What do you do with that? And many of you, I suspect, bought fish from Gulf of Maine sashimi, and in the course of a week, they flipped from a white tablecloth business to a direct-to-customer business, and on a cell phone. It was really an amazing thing. The hard part is that every 6 weeks, my experience is that the nature of the pandemic and its impact on us has changed. And so whatever the problem is today, it's like 6 weeks from now, what's it going to be next? And we've struggled with it. We had a real management internal kind of philosophical debate about we should just, we're the 21st century, we should be virtual forever. And others felt like, no, it's, relationships are in person, are fundamental. So we've struggled with it philosophically, operationally, but we've kind of found our way. And that is that you got to reassess every 3 months. I had a daughter and her family move in about a year into the pandemic. And I was insensitive to just how profound this was for families, mm-hmm. Having kids all gone. And it was a blessing to realize that, people with young families, people with aging parents, it's been inconceivable what families have had to deal with. And so a lot of this is about really, really supporting families to do what they need to do. And we're still in, each of our teams at this point in the game makes their own decision about how hybrid they are. It ranges from a couple days in one team to 4 days a week in the other. And we're focusing more, back in the spring, we started doing, hosting a lunch, actually a lunch, a breakfast or ice cream or pie in the afternoon once a week. Simple idea, but people started showing up on Thursdays, and they realized that
there will be pie.
That's right. Then they realized, gosh, not only is the pie good, but it's so wonderful to be working with these people again. And so, we've kind of taken the supportive incentive approach as opposed to okay, that's it. And it's coming, but it's been really hard thing to keep on top of.
Yeah, it's been challenging for everyone to navigate it, and the heavy hand doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
The empathy, the flexibility, the free food, it's all a factor. We had our summer interns in the office yesterday, and we wanted the rest of the staff to come in to support the interns, and the ice cream truck was there. Well, it works.
Yeah.
It definitely works. But for younger people that want to be in an office environment and learn from people, they're just so hungry to learn from others. So, yeah. But I like your approach of kind of just reassessing every 3 months, because it just keeps changing.
Yeah, and I would readily acknowledge that I've been more on the let's get back at it and get inside of things, and it's really been the wisdom of a management team and staff that have us, I think, have our compass in the right place. Yeah.
Talk about recruiting for a second, because we all struggle to find and retain talent. As a mission-based organization, I'm sure your pitch to people is a little different. Is it difficult to get people to come to Maine, because your staff is growing?
Yeah, no. So we're dealing with this incredibly mobile and reassessing labor force like everybody is. And interestingly, our turnover, percentage of staff in a given year has been steady the last couple of years as to what it was previously. Although in the first year of the pandemic, that May, the Great Resignation, it was like in May, people were leaving left, right, and center. It was like, oh my God, what's happening? And I asked one of our finance people to just look at the percentage of turnover versus prior years, and for that year, it just all happened in 1 month because everybody was hunkered down.
Yeah.
So it's, but the other change for us is we've been growing. So we've not only been replacing staff, but we've been adding new staff. We've increased our staff by somewhere between 35 and 40% over the last 2 or 3 years. So we've been struggling with how do you and kind of enculturate a group of people that you can't be with. To the question about recruiting, we work hard at finding good people. We network extensively. In the last couple of years, with increasing attention to diversity, we're working hard on that front. We've made progress at the board level. We're struggling at the staff level in a what's substantially a monoculture from a labor force point of view. We do see really good people come. I think the cup half full of this disrupted labor market is really good people are looking for opportunities, and people care deeply about the climate issue, and so we're attracting fantastic people.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
And they love to come. I mean, people. If you don't like winters, then you're not going to come to Portland. But if you're concerned about the issues we work on, if you're looking for quality of life, this is an incredible place to be.
For sure. It's great to hear how much you're expanding. Microphone's up. If anyone wants to step up and ask Don a question, I will kick it off with some audience submitted questions. What's your secret for leading with the same passion and commitment after more than 25 years in the same role?
So I never stayed in any place for longer than 4 years. One job, the Outward Bound job, was 6 months of the year, so that doesn't count as 5 years. It took me until I was 38 to find what I wanted to do. So my first answer is, keep looking for it until you find what you're passionate about. And I think everybody here is probably living that. The second is, hire good people so that it's enjoyable, and that you can have the pleasure of having impact, and then take on big problems or big opportunities, and that we've fundamentally transformed every 4 or 5 years what we are. So I feel like I've had 6 jobs in the last 28 years.
Great. Okay, here's a good one. Climate change feels overwhelming. What's your advice on how companies, communities, and individuals can wrap their heads around it and make meaningful change?
So I think everybody in this room is probably working this themselves. The first is just to acknowledge the problem and understand it. It is, we have a really profound and I think grim challenge with climate change over the arc of the century, and if you just have to recognize that. The second interesting is reading, and Alan Lishnas here, who worked with me for 28 years, and he was the person who was at GMRI before I got there. I never liked science fiction, and he turned me on to science fiction. And for what it's worth, read science fiction because that community is anticipating what's happening, and it's extraordinary, the lessons there. Then it comes around to walking the walk. So as a family, buy an electric car. As a business, figure out how to get to a zero carbon commitment immediately. You can buy offsets and get there today, and then you can focus on your energy consumption and get there truly, over 10 or 15 years. And then it's about communicating with Congress, carbon policy, and it's about walking the walk and exercising our political freedom.
Right. How can no one have a question? That's a question. I see some. Oh, here we go. Carlos, hello.
Yeah. So I just was wondering, a lot of nonprofits sometimes have a little trouble working with the for-profit market sort of forces. I wonder if you could talk a little more about how the venture group is working within the organization and the drive, the rationale behind that and the problems you're trying to solve there.
Sure. So I think the distinctions, the difference between for-profits and nonprofits are actually quite minimal. And I think we make a mistake of drawing a big distinction. It's about solving problems. It's about all the fundamentals of management and people and governance and whatnot. So I think that's really important to consider. In terms of how we do it, this is something that, half our management team has business experience. And so, we had the skills and the orientation to think about how do you bring the for-profit model to bear on social problems, on environmental problems. And part of it is realizing that market forces trump everything else. And so if you can figure out how to kind of work a for-profit business model that's harnessing a market force, you can be hugely impactful. And there's also downstream the revenue diversity. There's a lot of mechanics challenges. There's a lot of legal issues you got to sort out. It's a whole new skill set. You got fiduciary responsibilities. So there's a lot of technical work. And then one of the things we've struggled with is conflict of interest. So we're involved doing the science on fisheries, and we spun off a company to teach fishermen how to produce sashimi grade fish and maximize their profit. And so how do you anticipate that challenge and manage it? So there's a lot of nuance, but I think you got to both work the nuance and commit to the long term, because it's startups, for-profit work involves failure, and you got to be willing to risk failure as well as hope to be successful.
Right. Hello.
Hello, thanks for the conversation. I was wondering if you have any thoughts or vision about the Portland Fish Pier.
Great question. So the Portland Fish Pier, as many of you know, it's down right in the heart of the waterfront here. It was when it was created in the 1980s, it was a really novel idea. The seafood supply chain is opaque. It's very kind of historically processor and distributor controlled. Pricing can be weird. So it's one of the last businesses to become transparent. And the notion of the fish exchange was, instead of fishermen landing fish and selling it to a broker who had them captive as a market, so paid them minimal money, that you could display the fish and auction it to the highest bidder. So it's a simple, pretty good idea, and it worked in its early years. And the fish exchange has really been challenged over the last 20 years by increasing regulations, the challenge of how to flip from high volume, low quality to low volume, high quality, and a state to our south, Massachusetts, that provides a lot of financial incentives to fishermen, whether it's free wharfage, or you can land lobsters that you catch a net down there and get paid for them. Here you can't; you have to throw them overboard. So there's a set of real regulatory and financial challenges. We've been watching this really closely. There are a lot of good people working on it, and so one thing you got to do is just stay out of people's way. On the other hand, we're at a moment here where I think the fish exchange really has to fundamentally rethink who it's going to be for the 21st century, and I think the good news there is that the city of Portland is going to support that process. I mean, this community has been incredibly supportive of its working waterfront, the fish exchange being one.
Okay. I think this is going to be our last question.
Hello, my first time being here. This discussion's been a little different than I expected, but I really do appreciate all that. But I have a question about the Gulf of Maine, since in your title of your institute. Offshore wind, it's coming to the Gulf of Maine, $1 billion industry. And I just wonder what's your institute's approach to this, and what's to be managed, what's to be researched, what are you engaging with offshore wind?
It's a great question. So back to the climate change question. I mean, offshore wind has the potential to be one of our fundamental sources of renewable energy. The wind field, because of the way the jet stream works, the wind field out here in the Gulf of Maine is an incredibly, there's more wind in the Gulf of Maine than there is anywhere else on the East Coast. Again, my friend Alan here, he spent time in Finland over the years, and he came back one year and said, there's wind turbines going up on the ocean every place over there. It's going to come here. And I said, it'll never come here. And next year he comes back and he says, there's more wind turbines over there. It's going to come here. And because of his awareness, we ended up hosting an ocean wind symposium in 2007, I think it was. People from all over the country. That led to the formation of an ocean energy task force under Governor Baldacci, which I co-chaired. And then there's been 10 years of complexity since then. And Governor Mills charged an offshore wind task force, which many of you have read about. The fishing community has grave concerns about this because of siting issues and environmental issues. If you're interested in this question, Google offshore wind task force. There's been an enormous amount of technical work done on this question, and it's important to understand the nuance. And I think that what's going to happen here. So what we've been doing is being involved in the process, and at both a leadership level and in a technical level. We've got scientists serving on the kind of technical committees, really looking at the environmental impact and whatnot. So it's another incredibly complicated systems problem. You got to think about the wind, you got to think about the ecosystem, you got to think about the grid. Can the grid even handle that energy coming ashore in Maine, and where? You got to think about the communities that are going to perhaps oppose it, and understand why, as opposed to just roll over them. So we're involved in this at multiple levels, and frankly, we grapple with how to be involved with it smartly, because it's such a big thing. And we're going to see it play out. The federal agency, BOEM, that oversees this is on track. You heard about $1 billion lease sales down off of New York. In 2024, that process will play out here, and then there'll be a decade of struggle to actually get, wind farms built. And there's a profound need for that energy, and there are incredibly challenging problems to solve in terms of doing this in a way that works for marine users, fishermen most importantly. And I think the single most important thing there is to really take the time to understand those fishing concerns, because they're legitimate. And we have to reckon with them. And I think we can. I think it's really about investing in their future as part of the process, as opposed to just figuring out how to get it done.
Well, that's leads into the final question, which is tapping into Don Perkins, the futurist. Describe the Gulf of Maine in 2050.
So that one's easy, actually.
Okay, good.
And here's why it's easy. The climate process is a 30-year equilibration process. So what we're doing today in terms of carbon output is going to determine the climate reality 30 years from now, so 2050. And so we have a pretty good sense of the warming, the sea level rise. So we're looking at, 18 inches. Where's Dave? Where's the guy who's smarter than I am? So our climate guy back here. So 18 inches mid-century, Dave?
That's where we're planning.
There you go. So, 18 inches, and not just 18 inches, but high tide and waves and storm surge on top of that 18 inches. And we're all seeing it, down here by Whole Foods,
Right.
over on the wharfs. So it's going to be about wet feet, lots more wet feet in 2050. We're going to see the ecosystem is incredibly productive. And so it's not like the ecosystem is going to die, but it's going to change. The things that we fish for today are going to change. And there are species that are moving our way from the mid-Atlantic. And so it's all about, it's about paying attention to the science and positioning to be ready for it. I think the thing I think is impossible to predict is the geopolitics. We're watching what's happening in the Ukraine. The climate issue, a nation state decides to try to somehow geoengineer and put reflective sulfur up in the atmosphere to reflect sunlight. That's starting to show up in science fiction. These kind of efforts to engineer, our ecosystem to deal with climate change. That's showing up in science fiction. 20 years from now, that will be happening because humanities won't have solved the carbon problem soon enough, and we have to figure out how to deal with the physical problem and the geopolitics of that. How does China reckon with trying to re-engineering the climate? How do we? And so I actually think, what we've been living through is I think good training for where we're headed. Yeah.
Well, we're glad you're at the helm of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, thinking about this and helping us get our heads around it, and leading your amazing staff there. So thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. I did want to let you know that Carol Coltis, our business project editor, is here this morning, and we will be posting the key takeaways from Don's talk that Carol's going to be pulling together. But we are also going to include Don Perkins' science fiction recommendations in that, because we are all ready for some summer reading. So thank you all for coming. We will see you again in the fall. We'll send you a little follow-up to get your feedback on today, and love to hear who else you would like to see in the red chair. So thank you. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you.